Okay, good morning history buffs, history lovers. Welcome sa isang bagong episode ng History by Bike. And well, andito tayo ngayon sa may palayan, sa may gulod, Kabuyaw. So, bago nga pala natin simulan ang ating bagong episode, huwag kalimutan mag-like, mag-share, and mag-subscribe sa aking YouTube channel. And this is History by Bike, and ang magiging bagong topic natin ay tungkol sa mga bagyo. So yung mga historic na nagdaan na bagyo sa bansa natin and yung mga effects nito sa ating bansa. So stay tuned, and this is History by Bike. Welcome to my new episode. Right, so simulan na natin yung ating episode. So yung mga bagyo sa atin, sa bansa natin, well, alam naman natin na lubha talagang mga mapaminsalayan sila, lalo na kapag yung mga sobrang lalakas. And well, actually nung panahon pa lang ng mga Kastila, meron na tayong established na weather bureau. So meron na tayong institution na itinatag actually sa Manila, yung Manila Observatory kung tawagin. And doon nakakapaggawa sila ng mga observations ng klima, or yun na nga, parang siya yung predecessor ng kung tawagin natin ay yung Pag-asa. So yung Manila Observatory ay isa siyang institution na pinapatakbo sa pagkakalam ko ng mga fraile. So parang isang religious order or religious institution yung nangangasiwa sa kanya.
The Manila Observatory is a scientific research institution established in 1865 by the Jesuit mission in the Philippines. With Federico Faura at its inception, it was engaged in the systematic observation of Philippine weather. It began serving typhoon warnings in 1879 and embarked on earthquake observations in 1880. In 1884, the Spanish government issued a royal decree formally recognizing the Manila Observatory as the official Philippine institution for weather forecasting. The years after saw the observatory branching off into other areas of scientific research and service. In 1885, the observatory began its time service that greatly benefited merchant shipping. A seismology section was established in 1887. In 1899, the observatory ventured into astronomical studies. The American colonial government recognized the importance of the observatory's work and, in 1901, established it as the Philippine Weather Bureau. For about 45 years, the observatory remained active and famous in international expositions and scientific expeditions. The institution continued to be well known for its accurate typhoon forecasts and scientific works in the field of meteorology, geomagnetism, and astronomy. The Second World War brought almost irreparable damage to the institution. During the Battle of Manila, the observatory, with all its valuable instruments and scientific documents, was completely destroyed. After the war, the observatory ceased to function as the Weather Bureau since a distinct government agency was established for this purpose. A powerful storm also devastated the region at the end of the 19th century, striking the islands of Samar and Leyte with strong winds and a deadly tidal wave in a manner similar to Haiyan's. The hurricane reached Leyte and struck the capital of Tacloban with great fury. Read the story in the New York Times on November 28, 1897. In less than half an hour, the town was a mass of ruins. Reports at the time estimated that the storm, one of the worst disasters reported from the Southern Ocean in many years, had killed more than 6,000 local residents and 400 Europeans. The storm struck the central Philippines in early October, but didn't register in the US press until more than a month later, after a ship arrived in Hong Kong bringing letters and papers which contain accounts of the ravages of the tidal wave and the winds, reports said. The former government official Rafael Lotilla cites a study of the 1897 typhoon carried out at the time by officials from the Observatory of Manila. The study estimates the number of dead to be roughly 1,300, far fewer than US newspapers reported. In November 1912, a powerful storm was reported to have caused widespread devastation in the region. News reports from the time are eerily reminiscent of coverage of Haiyan's impact today. Tacloban was almost entirely destroyed with great loss of life, reads a report in the Washington Times of November 29, 1912, a time when the Philippines were under US control. The exact death toll from that typhoon was unclear. An article in the Washington Herald on November 30 suggested that probably half the population of Tacloban and another city, Capiz, had been lost. It put the population of Tacloban at 12,000 and that of Capiz at more than 20,000. But a report on the same day in the New York Times put the provisional death toll far lower, at slightly more than 300. But the newspaper acknowledged that damaged telegraph lines meant no estimate is yet possible of the number of fatalities or of the property losses.
The ship would rise out of the wave and slam down into it with such an impact that it made you think that it was possible that it would break it in half.
As the storm tore through the region, the sailors got a crash course in battling an enemy more treacherous than the Japanese. The Third Fleet was being ambushed by a killer typhoon. A typhoon is the Pacific's version of a hurricane, a spiraling mass of wet, gusting air that gathers speeds up to 150 miles an hour, bringing with it blinding rains and punishing winds.
The eye is the most intense part of a tropical cyclone, and so that's where the most intense winds and the most intense seas are created. It's like a big vacuum cleaner, and in that eye, there's a big, giant sucking sound, and that low pressure is what causes the intensity of the storm, the intensity of the winds, and the concomitant intensity and height of the seas.
Typhoons are one of the strongest forces of nature on the planet. A typhoon has a huge extent The effects can be felt over 800 miles away, and it can be over many, many days.
Most typhoons sputter and die out before reaching killer status. But if conditions are right, a typhoon will slowly pick up power and momentum until it explodes upon the ocean. 90 fighting ships of the Third Fleet were on a collision course with just this kind of typhoon. And Admiral William Bull Halsey didn't see it coming. Bull Halsey was ready to prepare for the next attack on Luzon. On December 16th, as the victorious ship sailed east to their rendezvous point for refueling, a tropical disturbance was gaining speed, power, and moisture over the open seas. Halsey was unaware of this approaching danger.
By modern standards, they were really operating in the dark. Weather satellites didn't exist. They had not established a technique of weather aircraft and weather surveillance by aircraft, and so they had to make judgment calls.
As a matter of fact, it was sometimes luck of the draw that a plane returning from mission would see weather.
That's exactly what happened on December 17th. As the storm moved closer and the weather began to deteriorate, one of the fleet's search pilots spotted the storm from his plane and sent a report to Halsey's flagship, the USS New Jersey. Since weather data was considered tactical information, the message had to go through a lengthy decoding process. The report didn't reach Admiral Halsey in time. He was leading his fleet straight into the storm. The smaller vessels, such as destroyers, were at greatest risk.
Destroyers are called tin can because they have a lot of armor but not much armament. They're very light, they're made for speed. They're 300 feet long. That sounds like a pretty big ship, but compared to some of the other ships we were operating with were pretty small.
By early morning on December 17th, the so-called tin cans were being bounced around at the mercy of the heavy winds and waves as they tried and failed to refuel. Refueling is vital in bad weather because the weight of the fuel helps keep the ship stable. By 11 a.m., the seas were getting rougher and the barometric pressure was falling rapidly.
And when it starts dropping, you've got a problem. The storm is near. That's the warning. And when the bottom started dropping out of it, we all said, uh-oh, there she goes.
Bull Halsey was perched on his post aboard the New Jersey, trying to balance the considerations of weather and military maneuvers. Archie de Riker and his shipmates on the hull waited for official word to take precautions. They were surprised when it didn't come.
Other ships had determined that we were in the path of a typhoon, and they couldn't understand why Third Fleet did not take action to avoid it.
That struck us as something that was peculiar and almost unbelievable. When we could see, as plain as day, that the weather was not going to improve, it was going to get far worse.
Halsey had to weigh the options.
A challenge, I think, for he and the battle staff was to make decisions that not only kept the safety of the fleet in mind, but also the fact that they were supposed to be dropping bombs on target.
Halsey persisted with the command to refuel and stay in formation. Individual ship captains started to prepare for the worst. Charles Calhoun was a 31-year-old graduate of the Naval Academy from Philadelphia and captain of the USS Dewey.
I had been told by my favorite executive officer, if you're encountering weather where the barometer falls at a rate of 0.03 inch per hour or greater, you're encountering a typhoon and you had better, in his quaint phrase, haul ass, unquote.
Captain Calhoun knew it was time to take care of his ship before all else.
We moved everything that could be moved from stations high in the ship to stations low in the ship, with the idea that everything we could reduce or lower into the bottom of the ship would improve our stability.
Just a mile away from the Dewey, Henry Plage, the 29-year-old captain of the USS Tabarer, gave his sailors the order to prepare their ship for severe conditions.
We told them to batten down all hatches as a general term. With stormers approaching, take all precautions, and they had been trained in what to do in those situations, and so they did it.
By the time the sailors of the hull tried to take action, it was too late. The storm was hitting them at full force.
And that night, it was pure havoc on the bridge. The waves were so great, and the wind was at such a high velocity that the rain, it would just about cut your skin. It would coming down at such a force.
The ship was plunging pretty badly and up and down motion and starting to roll pretty badly. When I arrived up on the second deck and stepped out behind the chart house, I realized that the starboard side of the ship was submerged. It was actually awash. And the ladder, the starboard ladder to go to the bridge, was awash. I said, good Lord, we're really laying over.
By midnight, the Third Fleet was cruising into the eye of one of the most destructive storms to ever hit the U.S. Navy. Finally, at 8 o'clock the next morning, Halsey informed General MacArthur that refueling was impossible. Halsey's fleet would not be able to provide cover for MacArthur on December 19th.
Ikalima ng Nobyembre, taong 1971, hinagupit ang kabisayaan ng bagyong Uring. Nagdala ito ng matinding buhos ng ulan na tumagal ng mahigit 3 oras. Ang resulta, matinding pagbaha at pagguho ng lupa. Halos 6,000 katao ang patay. Karamihan ng mga nasawi ay mula sa Ormoc City. Pahirapan naman ang relief operations dahil nagkukumahog pa noon ang mga otoridad na tugunan ang pangangailangan ng mga biktima ng pagputok ng Mount Pinatubo 5 buwan bago nito. Nabisto rin ang illegal logging sa lugar dahil sa mga inanod na troso na ikinamatay ng maraming residente. Sa tindi ng epekto ng bagyong Uring, tinanggal na ito ng pag-asa sa listahan ng mga pangalan ng bagyo.
Trapped on a drifting rooftop, this family's life raft is heading for a collision with a bridge, and its passengers are powerless to stop it. Only one child will be saved from this brutal tragedy. This is one of the many ordeals brought in by the arrival of Tropical Storm Kitsana, which hit the western part of the Philippines this weekend. 80% of the capital, Manila, has succumbed to flooding as a result. And with a population of around 12 million people, the death toll is rising. As the floodwaters recede, an ocean of mud is left behind. 500,000 people have already been displaced and survivors are struggling to cope.
Our community has nothing to eat. We cannot find anything to eat.
A lack of drinking water and food and worsening sanitary conditions have left the army and rescue workers overwhelmed by the situation. The government has asked the international community for humanitarian aid. With its marine tropical climate, which is typical in Southeast Asia, the Philippines are no strangers to typhoons and the torrential rains of the summer monsoon. But the devastation left by Kitsana has reached new highs because it hit the country's biggest urban conurbation, which is largely unregulated and populated by a number of shanty towns. This tropical storm is the latest in a series of weather-related disasters that have hit the region with a disturbing frequency. At the beginning of August, Typhoon Morakot struck the Philippines, but it was Taiwan lying further north which paid the heaviest price. Floods and landslides claimed the lives of 500 people and caused more than 100 million euros worth of damage. China evacuated 1 million people from its southeastern coastal provinces as Morakot approached. The formation of typhoons and tropical storms depends on the variation of temperatures on the ocean's surface. So some scientists believe that there could be a link to global warming. Over the past 35 years, typhoons have certainly increased in size and power, but there isn't enough data to confirm categorically that there is a connection. Kitsana has come at a significant time. World leaders are currently discussing how best to protect the planet from global warming. The devastation left in the Philippines could remind them just what is at stake. If this type of natural disaster becomes more frequent as the world warms up, pictures like these could serve as a window into the future.
The United Nations is using satellite imagery to help coordinate the emergency response. Hundreds of communities in this red zone in the Philippines had damaging winds in excess of 120 kilometers per hour. It was double that near the eye of the storm. States of calamity have been declared on islands across the archipelago. And take a look at these before and after images. We know much of Tacloban has been completely destroyed, but it wasn't just coastal communities. This inland town was wiped from the map. And on an island to the west, this town of 36,000 people suffered widespread devastation. Well, typhoons are common in the eastern Pacific, but this one was quite literally off the scale. It had winds in excess of 300 kilometers per hour before it hit the Philippines. That's faster than a speeding racing car. And in the face of that, very little we humans can build would be left standing. Mike Armstrong looks at the terrifying power of this typhoon.
When people use the phrase off the charts, they're usually exaggerating. Not this time. Typhoons and hurricanes are categorized on a scale of 1 to 5. Haiyan could be a new number.
If we had a Category 6 scale in the Atlantic Ocean, it could very well have been right at that threshold if we set one.
A storm qualifies as a hurricane if it has sustained winds of 119 kilometers an hour. At that point, it's damaging roofs and breaking branches. As it moves up, things get worse quickly. By Category 3, trees are snapping and uprooting. By Category 4, buildings start losing roofs and walls. Category 5 is catastrophic. Areas can be left uninhabitable for weeks or longer. That's what the Philippines have gone through. In fact, to qualify for a Category 5, winds have to be 252 kilometers an hour or higher. Haiyan was more than 50 above that, more than 300 kilometers an hour. Experts at the University of Western Ontario study wind and its effects on buildings. They say basically, other than nuclear reactors, nothing is built to stand up to a storm like Haiyan.
We really don't design common structures or houses, schools, and things like that for these kinds of wind speeds.
Canada's last serious hurricane was Juan a decade ago. 8 people were killed and it did $300 million worth of damage. The winds from Haiyan were twice as strong as Juan. According to experts, that could mean damage 5 to 8 times worse. The Philippines are suffering. Any country would be.
We would see very, very similar damage. The houses would be wiped out. I think we'd be hard-pressed to say we would be doing any better. It's just an overwhelming kind of storm.
One thing that does make the Philippines a particularly bad target is elevation. It's low. The 6-meter storm surge ripped through communities along shorelines. In fact, unlike most storms, Haiyan was actually gaining power as it made landfall. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Okay, so ito na yung pagtatapos ng ating episode. So sana nagustuhan nyo yung topic natin ngayon, which is yung mga bagyo na nagdaan sa bansa natin. At huwag kalimutan mag-like, mag-share, and mag-subscribe sa aking YouTube channel. So this is History by Bike. I am now signing off. dito sa may gulod sa Kabuyaw. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for more episodes.